There's something to be said about a horror director that's committed to a messed up ending. However, while you have to commend the commitment of a filmmaker that pulls off such a bleak end to an already grim movie, it's not something that you always want from your horror movie viewing. Sometimes we want the high-strung, nerve-splitting feature to end on a more rewarding note. After all, we all whoop with joy when Sydney finally gets the upper hand over her assailant at the end of every Scream film. But there are also movies that want to have their cake and eat it too. They want you to feel good when the horror flick comes to a close, but they also want to keep things open-ended. Whether it be the grander implications of the plot, conspiracy theories that change the way you see things, or just the simple question of what happens next. These film finales truly do creep up on you with time. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 horror movie endings that get worse the more you think about it. There are, of course, spoilers ahead, so beware. Number 10. The Invitation. Red Lanterns. The Invitation follows a divorced man, Will, and his girlfriend, Kira, on the night they're invited to his ex-wife's dinner party with all their mutual friends, who attempt to induct the pair into their cult-like support group. What begins as an awkward social event, though, quickly turns sinister when ex-wife Eden and her new husband David attempt to poison the guests. And while the final act offers up a cathartic end to the contained trauma that our main character Will goes through in the film, the real implications of the cult's wide-reaching plan is anything but pleasing. Just before the carnage of the final act, we see David, our main antagonist, go off into the garden to light a red lantern. This is something that at the time just seems to add atmosphere to the highly unnerving movie we're watching. But we get to see the real reason for this lantern lighting in the final few seconds. Will and Kira have watched their friends die in traumatizing fashion and have to defeat the cult members. However, what they believe to have been a personal attack on their group slowly gets put into perspective as the sounds of sirens and screams fill their ears. We're then treated to the sight of dozens of other red lanterns outside other LA homes, and the movie ends. What we have interpreted the whole time as a very personal, very intimate dinner party from hell is actually a citywide, possibly even countrywide attack. How many lives were lost that night to the cult's crazy ideals? The body count only seems to multiply after switching the movie off and dwelling on the implications. Number 9. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Losing it. There's only so much the human brain can cope with, and as we know, horror movies love to push the boundaries of that to its limit. One of the most polarizing things about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the brutal violence depicted, something that was not too common during its time. That is where this list comes in. For most of the movie, the brutality is focused mostly on one character, our final girl, Sally. We watch as her friends are viciously murdered, as her brother is mauled right in front of her eyes, and as she herself is kidnapped and tortured by the bloodthirsty family that spent all movie tormenting her. In what can only be called one of the hardest horror movie sequences to endure, Sally is pushed to her emotional limit during family dinner time, and is only able to escape through pure willpower and luck. The final scene sees Sally escape on the back of a pickup truck as the iconic antagonist Leatherface chases after her with his chainsaw. The further away Sally gets, the happier she becomes. By the closing shot, the blood-soaked and butchered final girl is laughing maniacally. But all is not okay. At first glance, you may think she's happy, but when you look into her eyes, you see that the events have actually pushed her so far that all she can do is laugh helplessly as the trauma of what she's gone through fully soaks in, just as the movie's end soaks in for you as time goes on. Number 8. Ready or Not. Talk your way out of this one. Yes, the fantastic Ready or Not is about a game of hide and seek, but it's not as simple as that. See, Grace is about to marry into the very rich and very powerful Les Domas family, and as an initiation tradition, she has to play a game. Unfortunately, the game Grace picks turns out to be the start of a very twisted and very dangerous ritual. The Les Domases are hunters, and Grace is an innocent doe. After watching Grace get hunted down, shot at, torn to shreds, and put through the absolute ringer, there's something extremely satisfying about hearing her last word of the movie: in-laws. But while the instinctual feelings of pride and satisfaction come almost instantly as the movie ends, the time it takes you to switch the movie off and go about the rest of your day causes your feelings of triumph to be replaced with one of unease. While we know that the mansion's destruction and the blood-soaked wedding dress are all the result of the evil devil-worshipping family and their crazy ritual, it's gonna be pretty hard to explain that to the cops. When Grace sits on the steps of her tormentors, lighting a smoke she got from the matriarch's cigarette case, she doesn't seem to realize the crime she's implicating herself in. It's very easy to imagine the story that the police would come up with when trying to piece together the events of the night. I mean, come on, who's gonna believe that the family made a deal with the devil to sacrifice Grace before dawn, and that when they couldn't accomplish the end of their bargain, boom! Number 7. Us. Hands Across America. In a similar circumstance to a former entry, The Invitation, what starts as a satisfying end for our main family turns into a cataclysmic ending for the rest of the USA. Us follows a family of Americans as their seemingly average vacation takes a turn for the worst. Turns out the government have been hiding tethered clones of every American citizen underground, and for our entertainment's sake, their years in the making uprising coincides with the Wilson family holiday to Santa Cruz. Throughout the movie, besides the scenes in the Tyler household, we only really experience the brutality of the tethered through the eyes of the Wilsons. This is for obvious reasons, as Adelaide Wilson herself has a dark and twisted past with the tethered. So in the end, when we see the Wilsons fight and kill their own doppelgangers and drive off into the sunrise, we're filled with relief. Right? Wrong. Because as mentioned, Adelaide herself has a secret. As her son stares knowingly at his mother, the audience gets to see what happens the day Addie went missing at the beach years earlier. That Addie that went down the Hall of Mirrors is not the one that comes back. And for the whole movie, we'd actually been following the tethered Adelaide, who'd kidnapped and stolen the life of the little girl all those years ago. Then we get to see a short but chilling glimpse at the true carnage the tethered have caused. What is a short panoramic shot of thousands of tethered stood hand in hand across the rolling hills of America is actually a brutal representation of the global massacre we only got a very close perspective of. It's a chilling shot to leave on, and it successfully sticks with you well after the end credits. Number 6. Happy Death Day to You, a new Babyface. While the Happy Death Day series has always been comedy first and other genres second, there's no denying how absolutely terrifying the premise of reliving the day you're murdered over and over again is. So even though the ending of the slasher sequel was played for laughs, the implication that it sets out for the HDD universe is unnerving to say the least. Us fans of the series love to drag on mean girl Danielle, and we were all glad to see more of her in the sequel. So adding those two things together, the ending that shows her getting trapped in her own time loop should be hysterical. At first it is, but the more you think about it, the ending of Happy Death Day to You shows the gang picking up trash as punishment for the destruction they've caused to the school with their time loop machine when a government agent comes to collect the kids. DRPA has confiscated their device and plans to create a time loop of their own, with a new test subject, Danielle. Seeing Danielle wake up screaming may not be as hilarious as you'd think. If she's screaming herself awake the way Tree had before, that means there's a new babyface killer in her loop. Why would the government want a device that puts people into a murder time loop? And what happens when they learn how to harness the device's power for their needs? Sounds like the beginning of a very different movie. Number 5. The Shining. What's up, Doc? I believe that the children are our future, but are their pasts standing in the way of their potential? By now, we all know that a traumatizing childhood can lead to a plethora of issues. Unfortunately for little Danny Torrance, a winter spent at the haunting and remote Overlook Hotel sets him up with enough trauma to last 5 lifetimes. Of course, we can't blame the Overlook entirely for Danny's distress, as it's mentioned several times in the movie that the Torrance family home life was less than ideal even before the movie began. Nevertheless, poor Danny's experience at the Hotel of Horrors only amplified his already messed up childhood to new extremes. Whether it be visions of creepy dead twins and a decaying and naked old granny, laying witness to the decimation of his parents' marriage, or having to escape the crazed, murderous determination of his own father, Danny managed to participate in enough disturbing experiences to break even the strongest of people. So while we initially sigh in relief when the kid manages to outsmart his enraged father in the hedge maze, it takes but a few seconds to start thinking about the long-term effects of the events of The Shining on Danny. With the release of Dr. Sleep, our suspicions have only been confirmed. Poor Danny was set up with a life of drugs, rage, and loss. Number 4. The Final Girls. Will it ever end? The Final Girls follows Max, a recently orphaned teen, and her eclectic group of movie-loving friends and frenemies on the night they accidentally end up inside their favorite slasher movie, the movie that stars Max's dead mother. If you loved Cabin in the Woods, you'll enjoy this. With more heart and complexity than any meta-slasher before it, it's hard not to invest in the characters as they fight their way out of the gory but cheesy romp they've gotten themselves into. It is devastating when any of our main cast of characters are killed off, and by the end, when you're left with only Max and her love interest Chris, it hurts. So when Max successfully kills off Billy, the Jason-esque camp killer, and she wakes up in the hospital with all her previously dead friends, it's the perfect ending of the perfect movie. But it doesn't end there. While our Scooby Gang are catching up and celebrating their survival, it starts to become very clear they didn't make it out like they thought. Now, they're in the sequel. The final shot shows Billy back again, ready to cause more carnage. It's played for comedy, but the laughs die off pretty quickly. You have to wonder, what happens next? Do they survive the sequel? What happens then? Do they go to the next movie and on and on? While we know the group were only at the theater to see the first 2 movies, Camp Bloodbath is based on the Friday the 13th franchise, which has an exhausting backlog of movies. And even if it is just the first 2 movies, how do we know they'll ever make it back to the real world? What if they just go through the first 2 films over and over again till the end of time? Ugh. Number 3. The Babadook. Grief is the real monster. The creative team behind The Babadook managed to produce a movie that channels the horrors of average life into a monstrous tale. Our protagonist Amelia and son Samuel are already on the brink of disaster when the movie begins. Samuel is a troubled child, one that many fans have complained about, and Amelia is in total disarray trying to manage her day job and the full-time job of being a mother. One night at bedtime, Samuel's choice for his bedtime story leads to the summoning of a monster named the Babadook. The Babadook starts to slowly weave his way into the family's lives. He torments Samuel and leads him to behave erratically, making weapons and becoming desperately irritable. Then, after driving Amelia slowly mad by bringing her to her wit's end, he starts to seep into the hopeless mother's mind, possessing her to kill Samuel. But it is through the familial love that they manage to fight off the Babadook's grip on them. The movie ends with the family happy again. They've let go of the reins of the Babadook and are even caring for the creature in their basement, now full of the courage it takes to overcome the demon. But when the credits roll, the real story starts to clarify in your mind. The Babadook is just a physical representation of grief and despair, and the way they managed to defeat their grief was through their love. It's a much darker film than the monster movie you went in expecting, and unfortunately, probably one that hits very close to home for many viewers. Number 2. The Thing. Final Breath. If you're a movie enthusiast, which I hope you are if you're watching this video, and you exist in a friend group of like-minded individuals, then it's more than likely you've had a late-night drunken argument about The Thing's ending. So of course, it makes this list. The Thing came out in 1982, and to this day, the ending is still being talked about. With time, the final shots of the movie have become more horrific, more nuanced, and bleaker than ever. After the mutilation of most of the team, the final survivor McCready blows up the Antarctic base, presuming that the Thing is dead, and finds Childs in the snowy wreckage, having disappeared during the final act of the movie. The two sit together and share a drink, theorizing that they'll probably freeze to death. At first, it seems like a bittersweet ending, but it's not long after the end that questions start to pop up. Is the Thing still alive? Does the absence of breath mean anything? Is the flask filled with whiskey, or is it a test? Filled with gasoline to see if the Thing still lives within Childs? What will come of the world if the Thing does live? Can we, the human race, fight against the mysterious alien life force, or will civilization as we know it cease to exist? So many questions. Number 1. Rosemary's Baby. The end is upon us. Rosemary's Baby is a trip. The movie is filled to the brim with gaslighting, coercion, and so many more distressing behaviors. But if you have somehow never heard of the insanely famous movie, here's a lowdown. The movie begins with Rosemary and her husband Guy moving into a new apartment building that has a troubled history. As the couple get closer to the tenants of the building, Guy starts behaving strangely. After a troubling night of hallucinating the devil atop her, Rosemary becomes pregnant. From there, poor Rosemary goes through the pregnancy from hell. Literally. In tandem with Rosemary's paranoia-inducing and traumatic 9-month journey, we get to learn information about the company that she and her husband have been keeping. Rosemary's friend, before falling into a mysterious coma, finds out that the neighbors and the doctor that they found for the couple have ties to a demonic cult. Putting this together, it becomes pretty obvious that Rosemary's hallucinations from the night she conceived are real, and that she's not just with child, but with Satan's child. The final scene of the movie shows Rosemary reunited with her demonic child after being told that he was stillborn. After her initial shock from finding out her baby is still alive and that he's the son of Satan, Rosemary eventually gives in to the cries of her newborn, resigning to bringing up a demon spawn. But what does this mean for the rest of the human race? Surely the birth of Satan's son means the end times are on their way, evil is won, and humanity must surely be at risk? It feels like the end of the movie is just the tip of the demonic iceberg. And that is the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other horror movie endings that get worse the more you think about it. As always, I've been Jess from What Culture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for way more horror goodness.